Welcome back to Let's Code. In this video, we're going to learn some really quick stuff about programming basics. So, to get started, we're going to talk about things like variables, if statements, and loops. So, let's get started with variables. So, the purpose of a variable in programming is to simply hold information. So, a good example of this would be a variable used to keep track of the player's position in a video game. Right, so what exactly do I mean, and how can variables be used? So in an example here, I have an integer, my number, and I set it equal to 7. So we'll learn about how this stuff works later in a programming language like Java, but just know that in this case, we stored the number 7 into a variable with the name my number, and that variable has the type integer. Again, we'll get more into that later, but this is what's happening. We're simply storing number 7 into the my number variable. So now, something about variables in programming languages to know is that they can be changed. So a statement like my number equals 8 would then simply change the number, would change my number from its previous value of 7 to its new value of 8. And also, in addition to variables being able to be changed, sometimes a programmer can choose to set them to a constant. So what does that mean? That means that you cannot change a variable. Once it's made, you will never be able to change it again. So that could be something like the speed of light in a scientific simulation, or like the value for pi. These values are things that don't change and kind of have stayed constant. So another example of stuff that you can do with variables is that you can also do some basic math. You can do, well, not basic math, but you can do math on variables and have them be assigned to them in most modern programming languages. So in this example, we have my number equals my number plus 7. So unlike algebra, this is not like saying, this is not able to be like manipulated like an equation. This is simply what we call an assignment statement. So what you need to know here is that my number is the variable that is being assigned to, and it's being assigned to its current value plus 7. So in our example, my number is equal to 8, and my number is being assigned to the value my number, which is 8, plus 7, so my number's new value would be 15. So that's a very nice overview of how you can deal with variables. You can do other kinds of math with them as well, and we'll go more into this in depth later and explain things like types, like integers and doubles and floats and so on and so forth. You'll hear more about these in some future videos. So the next topic I have for you guys is if statements. So what is an if statement and what happens here? So basically, this is a decision that happens in a computer program. So these happen all the time in most of your computer programs. What they do is they check a particular condition. So if my age is greater than or equal to 21, then can drink is true. This is my example, right? So anyone under the age of 21 cannot drink in the United States, but if the age is greater than or equal to that value, then they have hit the age where they can drink. So this is an example of what an if statement looks like in code. So if this condition is not met now, what happens is the computer will simply skip over this line and will execute whatever code is below this line. So again, the computer first checks the condition to see if it is true. If it is true, it will execute the code that is inside the if statement. And then if it is not true, it'll simply skip over that code that is inside of the if statement and keep going. So normally there would be 2 brackets or something around this can drink equals true statement. You can see a clear distinction between what the statement looks like compared to the rest of the code. So here's another example. You're able to have multiple if statements chained together. So in this example, we have if age is less than 21, can drink is set to false because you're underage. And then this thing right here is called else. This is the else statement, and this else statement has another if statement on it. So what happens is, if let's say age was set to a value of 21, so age would be equal to 21 in this case. The computer would run through this code, see that age is equal to 21, and it will skip over this statement right here. It'll skip over that, so it'll go skip over, and then it checks this statement here, which says else if age is greater than or equal to 21. So since age is equal to 21 in our example, it then will execute the next statement in the code. Now, let's say if age were set to a value like 19, when we go through it, if age is less than 21, which is true in this case, then it will execute the statement can drink equals false. Then it will skip over the rest of these if statements because they are chained together with the else keyword, right? So there's another way in which you can use the else keyword, and this code is actually equivalent to our last example that we had here, in that it does the same check. So if age is less than 21, it says can drink to false, and any other values which come in that are greater than 21, then greater than or equal to 21, then it'll set it to true. That is because the else with no other if statements will just simply be executed if the computer makes it all the way down to this check. So now, if in a situation where we were to not have like else, this else, you don't have to always have this there. It's just something that you can do with your code. So now our next thing is loops. Loops is another very essential concept for programming, and what they do is they keep running code over and over and over again until they hit a terminating condition. Some loops never really terminate until the entire program terminates, but it's kind of outside of what we're talking about here. So let's go through an example here. So this classic example of a student who gets in trouble and his teacher assigns him, I will not talk in class. He needs to write that down 100 times. The student starts doing that. He notices his hands are getting tired, but he uses a computer and he knows that you can run instructions over and over and over again, and the computer will never get tired. So he writes a program to do it, and this is what it looks like. So in this case, we have a variable called count, which we set to 0, right? And then the while loop will simply do like we did in the if statement. It'll check this first condition. It says while count is less than 0, while count is less than 100, and it's going to execute the code beneath it, right? And it'll keep executing this code beneath it over and over again until it gets to the situation where count is equal to or greater than 100. So in this case, we check while count is less than 100, we do a system.out.println, which is the Java way of printing something to the console. We print out the string, which is another word for text. So we print out the text, I will not talk in class. And we do this, we keep doing this over and over again 100 times. And how does that happen? Because we remember to add 1 to count every time that we do this. So if we set count to 0 at the very beginning, and we go all the way through to 100, we will write it out 100 times, I will not talk in class, because it'll go from 0 to 99, which is 100 different times, over and over again, until we get to the very end. And notice that without this statement, if we were to just simply have while count is less than 100, and system.out.println, I will not talk in class, we will be writing this, we will be printing this out to the console essentially forever. So without this count equals count plus 1, we don't get any closer to the terminating condition, and the loop would continue going on forever. Cool. So another version of loops is called for loop. The one that we learned before is called a while loop because it has the keyword while at the very beginning, and it checks while count is less than 100. So in this next example, we actually do the same exact thing as before. We print out I will not talk in class 100 times, yet we do not have to have that count equals count plus 1 stuff in there. So what happens here is, in this for loop, it provides a very nice and easy way for us to structure loops that we know are going to run a predefined number of times. So in this case, we set a variable I, we set it to 0. So this is the first statement, which is like it assigns a variable to something, and it's where the loop should start. And then we have the terminating condition is when, and then the terminating condition check is like, while I is less than 100, this loop is going to continue running. And then every time we have something to be run at the very end, which will it'll do something to I to get it closer to its terminating condition. So in this case, we do I plus plus. Now what that means is it will add 1 to the variable I. So just like we had in this example with the count variable that keeps getting added to by 1, we have the same thing going on with the variable I. So in this example, simply imagine the variable, this line above here saying int I equals 0, and then after we do this print line statement, we will add 1 to I at the very end, and it'll have a loop which goes while I is less than 100. Great. So that was all that I had for things like loops and if statements and variables. In our next video, we're going to actually go and see how we can apply this in a programming language, programming language called Scratch, which has these very basic blocks of code, and we will eventually use that to create a game very similar to the arcade classic of Pong. Thanks for watching.